Welcome! In this video we're going to be taking a quick look at Sedna, a epic grade DPS class Elune. Looking over at her base stats, at 6 stars level 60, she has decent HP at 24.9k, which is good for a DPS. Her attack starts off at a 5.1, which is pretty decent too, and her PDEF MDEF at 2.6 and 2.5k does help her out. She does have an increased crit rate stat, so that will help her crit a little bit more often, and her speed at 105 does put her at about in the mid-range. As she is transcended up to the max, she goes up to a pretty decent 37k HP with a very good 7.7k attack and 3.9k PDEF and 3.8k MDEF, making her somewhat easy to make a little tankier so she doesn't die as easy. Moving on to her skills, her first skill is a frontline only skill, meaning it can only attack the front line. It deals decent damage as physical and attacks a single target. The recommended skill gems for this is red, red, orange, as the skill really doesn't do anything else other than just a basic physical damage skill, and the skill gem set gives a 5% chance to stun. It's not a bad idea to go with the set, so at least the skill has a chance of stunning every now and then, which can help. As the skill is leveled up to the max at 6, it does go up to a pretty decent amount of damage, and being as she's a DPS, this can hit quite hard, so it is worth skilling up later, but I would work on her other skills first. Her special skill is a 4-soul skill. This one again is a frontline only skill. This one attacks multiple times and deals, again, physical damage to the target. This one will also buff Sedna with a buff that increases her crit rate by 20% for 3 turns at level 1. As the skill is leveled up to the max at 6, the damage goes up to a pretty decent 1520 plus 240% of attack as physical damage, and the crit rate buff goes up to a very nice 40% crit rate increase for 3 turns, meaning that once you use this skill, you not only do damage, but she also gains a high crit rate out of it, making her pretty easy for building on a high crit power build so you can do more damage. The skill gem set effect for this one is red, orange, and yellow. The red being for the physical damage, the orange being for additional crit rate, and the yellow being for the effectiveness of the buff. Meaning that if you go with the yellow one on here, put a pretty good one so that you get a better benefit to the crit rate on her. Another way you could build this skill is going for the full yellow. A full yellow skill gem set would give you an even better crit rate buff, meaning that it would be more than 40%, and you could possibly get this up to close to 50% or higher, depending on what gems you use. The skill gem set effect is only a 5% chance for reducing the target's attack by 10% for 2 turns, which is a very low chance of activation, and the 10% reduction in attack is pretty insignificant anyway, as it doesn't do much. So going with a full yellow set on the skill gems for this one might be a better option, as it'll make it a little bit easier to get that high crit rate or max out her crit rate so she can do more damage by critting all the time. Her ultimate skill, this is an AoE skill, 6 souls, and can attack everybody. This is again a skill that does physical damage. It also deals 20% additional damage to enemies that have less than 50% HP, so once they start getting weakened down and you attack them with this skill, it'll deal more damage if they're below 50% HP. The skill, as it is leveled up to the max at plus 6, goes up to a pretty decent 1k plus almost 200% of attack as physical damage, but the increase to additional damages for HPs lower than half health is 40%, which is pretty significant, as this skill combined with her special skill to increase her crit rate can allow her to hit very hard as an AoE. The skill gem set effect on this one is red, red, and violent for physical damage and violent speed after casting. The set effect is a 10% chance of increasing the damage the target receives by 10% for 2 turns, which is a debuff to the target. As the 10% chance is pretty low, it might not be worth going on this one, and perhaps an orange for extra crit or more red for more physical damage, making the skill hit even harder, especially to those enemies with less than 50% HP. Moving on to the passives that she has, her first one, whenever she attacks and she lands the attack on the enemy, in other words they don't evade, it will inflict a physical effect that causes the bleeding on the target for 3 turns. Bleeding is a quite nice debuff, as it doesn't diminish like Blaze does. It's going to be based on her attack, so building her on high attack will help, and it's a nice bleed effect to do nice soul damage to the target every time they take a turn. So every time she attacks, including with her AoE, she has a chance of applying the bleed effect for 3 turns. This means you're going to need some accuracy on her. Her second passive, when she attacks a target that already has the bleeding effect on her, the crit rate that she has increases by 20%, and her HP gets healed by 50% of the damage. This makes her quite good for dealing with especially PvE type mobs or anything, because she can basically solo a lot of things, because as she attacks, with her special skill increasing her crit rate, this skill increasing the crit rate, and her bleeding on every attack, this means that she can not only have high damage to the target, but she also heals herself by 50% of the damage she does, meaning that if all of the enemies have bleed effects on him and she does her AoE, she can deal massive damage and heal herself by quite a bit. Her third passive, after she attacks a target that has a bleeding effect and the target dies, she gets a buff to herself that increases her attack by 20% for 2 turns. While this one's not as impressive as the second and first passives, it is quite nice still and can still be helpful, as it is an additional attack buff that does stack with way buffs and other attack buffs. This means that it just gives her a little bit more damage, and if you're clearing out mobs or farming with her, then it can make her a little bit easier for dealing high damage, because once she kills something, she has more attack to kill more things. The type of build that you're going to want to do for her is a standard DPS type build, which is going to be pretty typical. Focus high on attack, as much crit as you can, and then crit power. As she does have skills and passives that do increase her crit rate, you can focus a little bit more on the crit power stat on her instead of crit, but you're still going to want her with decent crit, so she crits very often. For her too, one of the main things that she's good for is the bleed effect, which can be especially good against high HP enemies. So you're going to need some accuracy on her. Either go with accuracy or go with things like full moon sets. The full moon necklace, which increases accuracy of debuffing skills, or just a 3-piece set of the full moon to give her that 25% chance to apply is pretty good, or just going with any type of accuracy you can get on her is going to be helpful, as you're going to want to be landing those bleeds. For the Dimension Slate, it's going to be the same thing for her. You're going to want to try to get accuracy, but attack also. Since the bleed effects do scale with the attack, you're going to want to try to get as much attack as you can from anywhere you can, either in substats, base, in other words, your primary and your offhand weapons, you're going to want to go attack, no HP, because she can heal herself with her passive on anything that she attacks that's bleeding, so going with just full attack, she'll be able to somewhat self-sustain anyway, just from her passive healing herself by half the damage she does. Overall, Sedna is a pretty decent DPS Elune. She does have decent HP for an epic grade, and she has a very nice bleed effect as part of her passive, making her also very good for killing things in later game too, especially like bosses, where you can just keep applying the bleed effects to the bosses as long as she has enough accuracy to do so. She can be effective for various other things too, especially dealing with anything with high HP, as those bleed effects will take it down because they will ignore things. She's also good for dealing with things like enemies, say like a Freya that puts up shields all the time, because the bleed effects will ignore the shield completely and not take it away from it, as it is soul damage and it ignores the shields. This means that you can still kill things even if they're immune to damage. As long as they have the bleed effects on them, they will still die. This can be especially good for dealing with anything that you're trying to kill, as the bleed effects will go through it and she can still be an effective killer even against stuff that has somewhat type of sustain from barriers and such. That's going to be it for this one. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below and I'll answer them as soon as I can. Thank you.